Now, I don't think that Chesterton was fully on board with all of the plans, because Chesterton seems to have been consistently a critic of eugenics. And most of the Fabian socialists were pro-eugenics, right? The Beatrice and Sidney Webb, people like that, they were into dysgenics. They were into depopulation policies. And so when you read some of those Catholic writers like Hilaire Belloc and Chesterton, even though they were interested in and were, I think in the case of Chesterton, in the Fabian Social Society, they thought that this was some sort of, solution to, big capital and big corporations or whatever. But that's only part of the picture, because the thesis that I keep trying to explain and push and help people understand is that socialism is not a real opposition to capitalism. It's a dialectical control opposition that very wealthy people are smart enough and cunning enough to figure out is a key element of control. David Rockefeller, for example, figured this out. He studied under Austrian economics people like von Hayek. He writes theses under von Hayek. But then he also goes to study under the premier Fabian socialist, Harold Lasky, and he masters and understands both Austrian economic theory and Fabian socialist Keynesian economic theory. So David Rockefeller understands it from the vantage point of how it's control mechanisms and not ideas and theory that run things. And so he can say in his 1979 New York Times editorials that socialism and Maoism is great to control China. It doesn't make him a classical Marxist. It makes him a Keynesian Fabian socialist that wants to utilize whatever out of these systems. And that's why John Coleman's book is so great, because the blurb on the back says the enemy is not in Washington. Excuse me. The enemy is not Moscow. The enemy is actually in Washington, because he correctly understands, just like the Johann Ratu book, that the world adopted after World War II, not capitalism, not Marxism, but Fabian socialism. That is, socialism combined with corporatism. It's not fascism, although you might think it is. It's a type of socialism that is combined with culture critique or cultural degradation that fascism doesn't have and didn't have. Classical Marxism didn't really care about that. It was focused on the workers. But with Fabian socialism, you have the idea of let's unite with super wealthy people and let them fund it. And we will take over through the institutions, what they call penetration and permeation, and will destroy and degrade the culture in a way that the people become subservient to the corporate banker superstate. Thank you. Mm-hmm. And it's not fundamentally different than what Moses Hess and people like that talk about. It's not fundamentally that different from Bolshevism, except things like Bolshevism were their strategy. Although the Fabian socialists loved and supported and wrote letters to Krupskaya and Lenin and all that, they were all for that. They thought that this heavy-handed approach is not going to work. It needs to be the slow, gradual, slow kill approach. And they were correct, because that has what has worked.